While we sleep, the guardians of the night take to the streets, having said goodbye to those they love. Each other knowing they may never say these words again, they face the evil that we run from. They dedicate their lives to those that would hate them because they wear the badge. They wear the badge not for the glory or recognition, but for the passion to help others. This is the LEO First Podcast. We'll talk to the men and women in law enforcement, those that have retired, those that keep the prisons secure, and anyone who's impacted by law enforcement. We'll peel back the curtain, and you'll get the real stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Every law enforcement officer has a story to tell. Get ready to hear from the men and women who put their lives on the line every day for their communities and their country. Welcome to the LEO First Podcast. Now, here's your host, Michael Laidler.
Hey everybody, it's Michael Laidler, host of the LEO First Podcast, and I'm excited to be on here tonight. Why? Well, really, this is my second podcast of the day, and it's always like that first one gets me warmed up, and then the second one just it just brings me home for the night. And what I didn't realize when I was talking in the green room with our guest that we have on is that he has 54 years in law enforcement. I'm not lying, guys. 54. Yes, that's a 5 and a 4. 28 years active, and then a whole lot of years after that still being involved. To this day, he's extremely active. He's promoting the industry. He's recognizing issues, trying to correct them. And that is what we look for when we look at different guests for this show, because a lot of us try to give up early in this career, or we quit based on what's going on. He is the exact opposite. He has wet 5 decades in this industry, and I could tell you the energy that he has and just what I talked to him about in the green room. I know that he still has, he to him, he doesn't plan on stopping. I can tell you that based on what I've seen and what I'm feeling from him. But I know you guys will enjoy what he has to bring, because he brings a wealth of information, and he will be able to provide all types of information to newer officers, leaders, CEOs, people in the private sector, whatever it might be, because he's been able to handle all those areas. And I will tell you, he was recommended by a former guest, Michael Persley, chief of Albany PD in Georgia. And he told me that Bob has a lot of strong opinions on things. And I truly believe he's going to share them with us. And I want him to, because that's reality. What's the point of us not sharing the things we know and trying to help promote and hide the truth? So not postponing anymore. Our guest tonight, which I kind of said his name a little earlier than expected, is Bob Stewart. Bob, tell us about you.
Thanks, Michael. I guess I'm an old guy, so I have a long history. So I'll try to give you the condensed version. Born and raised in Pittsburgh, and in 1965, I went to Howard University. And I think early on in my life, I had planned to have a career in the military. And I say that because I think that there were probably some things in me that I brought to policing, and I got into policing by happenstance. So, but I think at least the whole notion of appreciating good order and discipline was already in me. I had those kind of parents, and so I went to Howard, and I tell people I got a great education. I'm not sure that I loved it. And in my, like I said, I went to Howard. I was a psych major, but at the time that I went to Howard, psychology was still a Bachelor of Science degree, and I rolled the dice. I just knew in the back of my mind that they're going to change this to a Bachelor of Arts degree before I graduate. So I'm going to roll the dice. Well, I lost. They never changed it, and the math courses that they that were requirements, I could still be there trying to pass trig and calculus. So I had beefed up all these psych hours, and since it didn't look like they were going to change it to a BA degree, I switched to political science, but I knew that it was going to require an extra year. So this is now 1969. And my draft board would not give me an additional deferment to the interesting thing was, so to be honest with you, I was looking around for a place there. What job could I get where I could get a deferment and at least finish my degree? Since I planned to go in the military, I just wanted to get the degree under my belt. So as fate would have it, my draft board was still in Pittsburgh, and they would not give me a deferment. So I was 1A when we had the draft. And so I'm looking around, and the DC Metropolitan Police Department is hiring. So I go and take the test, and I'm still half in, half out. But the longer I waited, I said, they're going to reach out for me. So on May 26, 1969, I was sworn into the DC Police Department. My first draft notice was dated May 26, 1969. Ooh. And to make a long story short, eventually, so I'm in the academy. Now, the interesting thing that happened is that I think somewhere around day 3, I was looking around and said, I can be a boss here. And I was lucky enough to go to an organization that had Blacks in command positions. And the longer I stayed in it, the more it seemed to call my name. And so I finished the academy. They let me finish the academy after declaring me delinquent for the draft. So I went in the Army. Make a long story short, I never left the States. And through a series of just fate, I actually got an early out to come back to the DC Police Department. So by the time I got back, most of my friends were starting to move out of patrol and into some specialized assignments. So it turned out that I went. So when I got back, they updated my training, and I went to work in one of the 2 busiest districts in DC. And it was a good entry into policing, because in the 3rd district in DC, which is Center City, you get to see it all. So very early in my career, I got a wealth of knowledge and training, and then went to a unit. And since I had a couple of friends, they vouched for me. And it was nicknamed Mod Squad, but it was a street crime unit in DC. And this is before the advent of soft body armor. It was before the radios worked well. The radios in the car were still hardwired in the car, and people still walk beats then. And so it was my introduction. So eventually, I maybe the 2nd year that I was back from the Army, I need to go finish up this degree. And so I needed a straight tour of duty. And in DC, we were still rotating around the clock. We didn't have straight tours of duty yet. And so I wound up going to the department's central cell block, where we house prisoners. And that was an education in and of itself. Not one of the real desirable jobs in DC. But 2 things happened. The first was, went back to school, and now I have VA money. And at the time, the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration was also giving money to go to school. So my part-time job was going to school. Finished up my degree at Howard in political science and minored in psychology and education. I mention that because I'll eventually start talking about the necessity to improve the education level in policing. And we've been calling for that since about 1968, but we can't seem to change that dynamic. So what I tell people is that I don't know whether the combination of subjects that I had, education, political science, and psychology, necessarily made me a better cop. It certainly made me a better boss. And so to the extent to which got my degree, but I also studied for my first promotional exam. But at the same time, I wasn't sure that they were going to reach me, excuse me, on that particular promotion list. So I thought about going to the FBI. So I applied to the FBI and said, okay, well, whichever happens first, if the FBI calls, I'll go. If I get promoted, I'll stay. So as fate would have it, Burchell Jefferson, who was the department's first Black chief, became chief before the existing sergeant list ran out. And I think, I never talked to him about this, but I'm pretty sure he looked at the list and saw an opportunity to promote 4 or 5 Black sergeants. And so he picked us up. The irony is that I was already studying for the next exam and had decided, look, I'm going to make sure I'm not back at like number 24. I'm going to be in the top 5 in this next list, so I don't wait. But I got promoted, and I had a good career in DC, and I probably either got promoted or transferred almost every 2 years. And so I had a new job every 2 or 3 years. It kept my interest up. I was realizing I was becoming a student of law enforcement. And by being in DC, I think I got exposed to a lot of things that police officers in other places don't. One, we're also surrounded by big, good departments. Montgomery County, very, very good department, big department in Montgomery County, Maryland. Prince George's County, Maryland, a department that, in the early 70s or 80s had a terrible reputation, went through a consent decree, revitalized itself, became a very, very good agency. And then Fairfax County, Arlington, Virginia. And so being in the Capitol, there was access to a lot of Justice Department information, and it was a place where you could see policing beyond the 4 corners of your own agency and learn from it. The most meaningful thing, of course, for me was that as I made sergeant, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives was founded in 1976. So I was a sergeant when Noble was founded, and they had their second annual conference in Baltimore. And so as a sergeant, as an associate member, I joined, but I went to that conference and found myself having a beer and talking to police chiefs from around the country. Many of them who were my mentors, ultimately, because I stayed in the business so long, became my friends and co-workers in some cases. And it was through this mentoring that I really got a much, much broader view of policing than I think I would have normally. So then about the time that I was a captain, I'd been a captain for a while, but the department really started to kind of fall apart. And one of the things that is the truth. It's hard to talk about in some ways, but in a lot of places where we as Blacks became the higher ranking officers in the department, we have social relationships, and our social relationships are a killer, and it's always tough, especially if you put your friends in important positions and they don't perform, then some people just can't pull the trigger and can't discipline their friends. And so there were a number of other factors, but I think if I look, at what really began our downward spiral was a lack of good order and discipline, and essentially what amounts to nepotism, and the fact that people were in positions and people were clearly violating some policies on a regular basis and not being disciplined for it. And so the early signs of an oncoming consent decree, I think, were obvious to me. and really fed into my frustration. So as I looked for places, I was eligible to retire. The last job I had was I was in charge of our promotional process. And I did one of the things, I'll point out a couple of them, but one of the things I think I point to and I'm very proud of is that I was in charge of the first clean exam in 8 years. All of the exams that had been held in the 8 years prior always had hints and suspicion about cheating. And I take it as a point of pride that, and my peers really were, congratulated me for having an exam where nobody could point to anybody having been given, information about the exam. So I went to Tallahassee, was only there 18 months. Mel Tucker was the chief in Tallahassee. And it was at the time really one of the best, I think it still may be during that period of time, the best department that I ever worked for. Mel was a good chief, very, very progressive. I met my wife there, but I was still going to be a chief. So I wound up, I was a finalist in St. Petersburg, but they had been through, I think, 4 riots about that time. I really didn't think it was a job for a neophyte chief, but I took a job in Ormond Beach, Florida, which is right next door to Daytona. It's a predominantly white upper middle class town, and so we joke about the fact that my arrival in Ormond Beach was a lot like that scene in Blazing Saddles where Cleavon Little rides into Rock Ridge. Anybody who's seen that. So from that point, I thought I'd be in Ormond Beach for 3 years, and I stayed 5. It went well. It was a good experience. I inherited some problems. The department was under investigation by the Department of Justice for sexual harassment, and I feel like I was given an opportunity to clean that up. I really had my eye on the city of Daytona. I thought if I could parlay that job in Ormond Beach to the chief's job in Daytona, that I could then parlay that into a vice presidency at NASCAR. I might be the biggest non-redneck stock car fan you're ever going to find in your life. That's funny. So ultimately, the job became available, and I applied. And the closer I got to the city manager, the worse he smelled. I just said, I don't think I could work for this guy. So I took a pass. He got fired 8 months later. And all my friends are going, now, see, you should have taken that job. And but by then I had taken the job at Noble. And so I was the executive director at Noble from 97 to 2001. And during that period of time, I think I must have just hit it right, because if there was any discussion about racial profiling anywhere in the United States, I got invited. And I think, for me, it helped really kind of carve out my future, because I'm still working around the issues of discriminatory policing. So I think being on the ground floor as we really began to take a hard look at racial profiling and the whole notion of capturing data on traffic stops, highway interdiction, all of those subjects, I basically became an expert in. So so when I left Noble, I had some decisions to make about whether or not I was going to look for another police chief's job, or whether I would, take a career and begin a career in consulting. And so I did kind of a combination of a couple of things. So I did become, open my first company, and in 2000, and So I wound up having two interim police chief jobs, one at Rutgers University and the other in Camden, New Jersey. And so I did those. I spent a year in Louisville. I had a good friend from DC, Robert White, who had become the police chief in Louisville. And he asked me to come down, but I said, well, I think I've made a decision not to strap a gun on again. And so he said, I said, I'll give you a year. And so he brought me in as the director of training. But my real job was, and this is, I think this is important to kind of your issues, which is the best jobs I've had as a consultant are assisting a new chief who goes into an organization. And what I say I do best is, it's like when you have a canine and you put them in the building and let them off the leash to go search. Mm-hmm. That's what I do. So if you bring me in, especially early on, I'm going to walk around and smell everybody and figure out, okay, who can we trust to get on the bus and who can we not trust, and to help sort out not only the shape of the organization and where we might make improvements, but who needs to be in which seat on the bus to make this work, to give us an opportunity for success. And so that's really, I was the director of training, but my real job was to keep White, and I always talk about how Bill Bratton, people kind of wonder, he's one of the very few people who have been successful at being a police chief on the East Coast and the West Coast, but he brought his boys with him.
He brought his own team.
Right. Yeah. And by then, Bratton he accumulated a squadron of either former police chiefs or former police executives, all who had a lot of history. And, and they're going into an organization where they don't owe anybody anything. And, which is really interesting because, I've always said, if the mayor in Washington, D.C. ever called me, oh, yeah, I'd go back and be the police chief in a minute, but there are advantages and some disadvantages to going into a new organization where you've not served with all those people all your life and everybody knows everybody's dark secrets. And so you go in and they all have a clean slate too. It works both ways, that you don't have pre-existing opinions about people in the organization, and in these days and times now, they're going to go research you as a police chief, and they're going to call friends in your that they have in your organization. They're going to ask about you and and try to figure out your pedigree. But there are also some benefits, in fact, because if I had stayed in DC, I would have only built one pension, whereas when I left, I'm pulling my pension, and now basically my take-home salary has now doubled because I'm taking a pension and I've got a brand new salary to put on top of it. So that's life-changing, and I tell people it's not just the money. You really create a new lifestyle when that happens to you. So time has gone along, and I have a big background in now in consent decrees, and I've also done some expert witness testimony, a couple of celebrated cases. I was an expert witness against Sheriff Joe Arpaio, and the interesting thing is that most of the discriminatory policing cases that I've been an expert witness on have generally involved Hispanic drivers, not Black drivers. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if, that's just the luck of the draw, or whether the ACLU and Latino Justice have brought more of these kinds of cases. But at the same time, I was asked to monitor a department in New Mexico. And then I've now been on, I think, 4 or 5 different consent decrees around the country. I'm currently on one in the Virgin Islands. I was there before. I've gone back, and that's on the accountability side of the House. Along the way, I have a fraternity brother who was a professor at Bethune-Cookman University, and we somehow, through his impetus, wound up having some real discussions about community engagement in law enforcement. So we've been kind of plugging away at some efforts, primarily in Florida. We started with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, and I think it's gone well, and we've learned a lot. For me, Randy Nelson is his name, and Randy is still learning. And even though he's been around police officers, he was a probation officer while he was working on his PhD. But again, even people who work in allied fields still don't really understand how the machine works up under the hood. Now, that's our fault. We've been so cloaked and so secretive about police operations and police functioning, but yet we still have an expectation that the public know more about policing. So, yes, we now have citizens police academies, but I think where we are headed, and so I have a second company called Policing with Our Community. And in that, we are opening up shop and trying to create training on police issues for community stakeholders. So we've developed a 3 or 4 hour block of instruction for citizens on use of force that involves a trip on a simulator. So rather than just giving them a trip on the simulator, we talk about deadly force, and we talk about the parameters for force. Then we put them on the simulator, and then we also ask them what their reactions were. So in some ways, it's some light research, because we do want to capture their experiences. And so that's one of the things I seem to be working on now. The second is really trying to reach out to HBCUs and criminal justice students at HBCUs. One, because no matter where they work, if they're civil rights attorneys, whether they are social workers, whether they are in corrections, probation, or parole, they will be interacting with the police. And so we clearly want to, and we find that when we have discussions with collegians, we get more questions than we can ever answer. And they're hungry for knowledge about policing. Some, of course, are looking for careers in law enforcement, generally speaking, looking at federal jobs. We try to convince them, despite the fact that your parents, your friends all poo-poo policing, they would tell you not to become a police officer. Well, mine had those same attitudes, and that's why I went and got sworn in before I called them. And I used to laugh at it because there was screaming and hollering when I told them I had joined the DC Metropolitan Police Department. But as soon as I got that white shirt, all that changed, and my mother started introducing me by my rank to people. And I kept asking.
She's proud.
Oh, well, hey, this is not what I heard on May 26, 1969. You didn't found religion?
She was proud. She was proud at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I used to say, yeah, I know. I've been around all you budgie black folks all my life. It's all about status.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. She was able to brag about something at that point.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm glad they got an opportunity to see that. and I think, I tell people, I guess my adage is, look, policing wasn't my first choice, but, two parts to it. One is, what I would say to people is, don't necessarily exclude it. Don't write it off. And if you think you got the right stuff, there is no better place to exhibit leadership than in policing. You get opportunities, and if you see yourself as a leader, if my mother was a teacher, my dad was a social worker. I inherited that issue of service. If you want to be of service to people, you get opportunities every day. Now, you're not going to get awards for it. Nobody else is going to see it. But you got to be satisfied with the notion that, you did something good for somebody. You helped somebody out of a crisis. People call you at their worst times. And and I say, generally, about 85% of all the cops that I've ever known were really very, very good, hardworking people. But yes, we've hired some people, and I think, generally speaking, we take an unofficial poll. Probably about 10% of all the cops in America probably shouldn't have been hired in the first place. And during their first 5 years, we figure out that there's another 5% that we shouldn't have hired, and we don't get rid of them. And the biggest complaint, I still go out and ride along with people. And I always say, a guy like me, I come to town and we're doing a job. And I say, well, let me go out and ride with somebody. And so I get Superman or Wonder Woman. They always send me absolutely great cops. Yeah. And it's like, where were you when I was a chief? And so we sit and talk and ride for a while. And as the trip goes on, I'm waiting for, there's always this magic moment. It just never fails. Somewhere during the 2 to 3 hours that we're riding along. Mm-hmm. And so finally it just comes out, and, they say, well, can I speak freely? Oh, absolutely. I was wondering when were we going to get to it. And it's usually a story about an officer that, we ride up on a scene, and there's an officer in the group, and they point at that officer and say, I hate that guy. And, I'm playing along. I already know the reason why, but why, pray tell? Because we have to do his work. And I think maybe more than anything else. Policing is not a job for lazy people and people who try to evade work, and it's crushing. And cops, the rule of thumb is generally, it's not my job to supervise these people, but I sure wish that my supervisors would curtail that kind of thing. So Pew Research put out a study in 2017, and there were a couple of things that came out of that study. The first one was only about half of the officers polled thought that the discipline system in their organization was fair. And they also, about 50%, reported that their underperforming peers were never dealt with by their supervisors.
Yeah,
maybe more importantly, and to our discussion here, the maybe the most surprising statistic was that 73% of the American public said that they knew and understood the challenges of modern policing. 86% of the cops said, no, they don't. And I think that's what really kind of prompted me to saying, all of the things that we do for crime prevention just don't go far enough. We need to get into, especially communities of color, and have much more discussion about three major areas of policing. And rather than be crime prevention anymore, it's crime mitigation. And, so all of the things that we've been doing for the last 50 years and calling it community policing are really crime mitigation and crime prevention efforts. The second area where, we need citizen participation is actual crime reduction. And so people need to be educated about crime reduction strategies, gun violence strategies, reduction strategies, and they're available. And some cities are having success in their gun violence reduction. And so there's P&I, Police Network investigation, and in Las Vegas, they've been reasonably successful. I think a lot of places that have begun using interrupters have found some success. And overall, I force deterrence. So I kind of say, it's let's make a deal. So the places that have done their, a lot of intelligence gathering, so, or they through ShotSpotter, which is now sound thinking, you collect gun shell casings. Then when you start to trace the shell casings, you can see a gun move around between groups and gangs. And then finally, you find the gun, but the gun has been used or attached to 5 or 6 people. So eventually, as you put together good intelligence, you eventually call them all in, and come. We want to have a meeting with you. Bring your families along. And so behind door number 1 is these people over here who are going to help you get out of the life if you so choose. They've been in the life. They've been where you are. They've been incarcerated. They know this turf, and they want to help you. So that's behind door number 1. Door number 2 is when we catch you again, and we will, that instead of going to the local attorney, we're going to go to the U.S. attorney and see if we can get you charged federally so that we can send you to Idaho to prison. And so it's your choice. And we just wanted you to know that we know who you are. We will be watching you. And so I feel very, very frustrated in a lot of ways in places that have not begun that process of really sitting down and having a gun violence strategy that they can announce to the public. Then the third area, of course, is accountability. And so under the accountability umbrella, usually the first thing that comes up is citizen review. And there are even NACO, the National Association of Civilian Law Enforcement Oversight, is very, very active. And that industry is still growing, but we don't see many models where people feel like it's working. And and one of the big drawbacks is that education about what's behind the blue screen takes so long that very often you have citizen review boards where the term might be 4 years. So during that period of time, that person learns a whole lot more about policing. And just when they get to the time when they can fairly and objectively evaluate a use of force, it's time for them to come off the board. Yeah. And we start that process all over again. So therein lies my interest in getting people prepared to go sit on police advisory boards, police review boards, and that they come equipped already with understanding how body cams work and don't work, what less lethal is, what de-escalation really is, so that it puts them in a better position of understanding. Now, I know we can't get them there, but I would absolutely love to do a class with news reporters who can't seem to get it right either. And it is like, every time there's an officer involved shooting and the officer gets put on administrative leave, it's what we do all the time, but it seems to be portrayed as this is some benefit to the officer that they put them on paid. They always make a point of pointing out it's paid administrative leave. Yeah. Well, if you would go read the union contract, you would find that's where it is. And that's what we do in every one of these cases. It's not an anomaly. So I have an uneasy and very tension-filled relationship with news reporters, but and I'll close out this part of it by saying this, and it all goes back to a story in the Washington Post that came out when I was a lieutenant in the 7th District in Washington, D.C. And a Washington Post reporter created a story on a little boy named Jimmy, who she reported was a drug addict and at 8 years old. And so we went out and looked for the kid, couldn't find him, we started to be suspect about this story. But the newspaper reporter stood by her story and won a Pulitzer Prize for it. And then the whole thing unraveled. And eventually Milton Coleman, who was the editor at the Washington Post, we finally convinced him that this child did not exist at all. And so he asked to see her notes, and she couldn't produce them. And so every news journalist who tries to interview me, I asked them if they are familiar with this story, and I warn them up front. I have a lot of tension with news reporters, because I really expect that if you're going to cover the police beat, that you know more about what's up under the hood and how the engine runs.
Correct.
Yeah.
So all these years of, you definitely have a lot of experience. You definitely have moved through the ranks. You've seen a lot. You've been at all different levels. You were at the point of where law enforcement was really changing, as far as in the 60s, 70s, 90s, to where we're at now. And one question I kept going back to in my head is, what is his favorite decade? Because he actually has 5 to choose from. So I'm going to ask you, because I think that's what a lot of people would want to know, because you've seen ups and downs, and a lot of it, obviously, for the sake of the show, we're obviously promoting the ups on it. But what was your favorite decade out of all the ones you've worked, whether you were actively in law enforcement or when you stepped out and started doing more of the private type work? What was your favorite decade and why?
So let me answer it this way. It was clearly the 70s. And I came into policing at a very, very good time. And there are a number of reasons why. But of course, and I generally talk about it this way. So those of us who have been around long enough, when we read President Obama's task force report on 21st century policing, we all read it and said, there's nothing new in here. You're not telling us anything that we don't know. Yeah. But what I go back to is that I'm old enough to remember that the last time that we had one of these major commission reports was back in 1968. It was called The Challenge of Crime in a Free Society. And it's basically where we began talking about community policing. And it's interesting to look back at that, because I think the kinds of things that were talked about and the whole idea of community policing was so refreshing. And it was a new way of policing. And it came right at the time, and I got the benefit that by joining the department in 1969, there were still Black officers around who had been discriminated against in their careers and mistreated. And so in DC, in some precincts, you had on midnights. Rather than put a black officer in a car, they would park the car and make the officer walk a beat. Snowy nights, they might park the car and have officers, black officers. So one, there were people still around to tell these stories, but there were also they had bad attitudes.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Right. They had been mistreated for so long. And I think it was instructional. You sometimes you learn a lot through experiencing disasters. So a couple of things happened, and during that period of time, so I'm being exposed. I find myself a student of policing and law enforcement. So I'm beginning to look at the industry. We have this kind of new face of policing, and that in DC, what was absolutely wonderful was the fact that there were so many black officers who got promoted because we figured out a methodology to study. And we studied in groups. But that process had already begun before I studied for my first exam. And so I got in a group that was run by a guy who was a lieutenant, and come to find out, that very early on, what of course used to happen is that in DC, you pretty much have to study for a year prior to the exam. And certainly the black guys were not the people who got advanced knowledge about what the exam material was going to be. So it was their methodology to get together in groups, divide up the information, make notes on it, and then everybody contributed when they got to the study group. So you would have homework, but so we would piece it together so it allowed people to catch up. The other big part of that was that, as a part of that mentoring was, so the guy who ran the first class that I was in, his name was Jimmy Wilson. So Jimmy said, okay, now next exam, you can't be in my group. You have to go start your own group. And so two of us, between me and Lynn Cook, who is one of my contemporaries, he and I both ran study groups, very successful study groups, and all of this is during the early to mid 70s. And so we tried to add up, and we think that between the two of us over our careers, we probably had at least 100, if not more, people who participated in our groups who got promoted. And wow. It leads to one of my favorite stories. And there was a guy who had been in two other study groups, and he never got promoted, and he knew me, and I started a group. So he said he was going to give it one more try. And so he got in my group. And so he got promoted. And on the day that he got promoted, I went to the ceremony, and basically we had already had the receiving line, and I think I was almost out the door, and he came and caught me, and he said, hey, could you come over here a second? So I go with him, and he took me across the hall where his family was, and introduced me to them, and said, look, I just wanted you all to meet this guy, because if it hadn't been for him, I never would have got promoted. That might be the best day of my career. And again, so those were like, this uptick. The interesting thing, so we had two police chiefs in DC who were very progressive. Jerry Wilson was one, and then the first black chief, Bertel Jefferson. And the department was run very well. We had good order and discipline. And I think, again, I'm getting promoted or transferred every 2 years. Everything's fresh. But I do say that at the very same time that we started talking about community policing, we also invented 911. 911 was originally devoted, it was supposed to be for emergency calls. So the first non-emergency call we took on a 911 line, we just killed ourselves. And so now 75 to 80% of all police calls for service don't need a badge and gun. And so those of us who are in the reform business were actually very, very thankful to hear people say, let's defund the police, because we said, okay, now we're going to get into this call for service workload and begin to look at all this stuff, because everybody understands that when you add up the cost for the car, the officer, the salary, the benefits, the gas, the oil, the leave, that we roll a car to take a report on either, these are my favorites, stolen auto. What are they going to show you when you show up to take a report on a stolen auto?
Hopefully they show you at least their ID or something like that, who they are.
Yeah, but the registration is in the car.
Yeah.
So they don't know their VIN number, right? So you still got to run it through the computer.
Correct.
We can take, and they're going to show you nothing. They're going to show you empty space where the car was.
Yeah.
So we're basically taking a report on air. And so you can take that report over a telephone in about 3 minutes. And you have to tell people, no, we are not going to go look for your car. We might run across it, but I have these calls stacked up. So I'm not going to, and this, so you get that. My other favorite is you get a call and a guy wants to report a burglary. And when you get there, well, what's missing? Well, my lawnmower. Well, tell me what happened. Well, my riding mower, I came out to use it and I couldn't get it to crank. So I went to go look for my push mower and I can't find it. Well, sir, might you have loaned that lawnmower to a cousin or a relative or a neighbor? Well, now that you say that, let me think about this a minute. You might be right. So we're paying people $40,000 and $50,000 a year to go take reports on missing lawnmowers. Mm-hmm. That's crazy. Yeah. We got to do better. So the interesting thing that happened was that the whole discussion about defunding the police only improved one type of call, and that's call for mentally ill people. So we're starting to see a better, scaled response to people who are suspected of either being off their meds or having gone flip-de-wink. But we still need to do a better job of talking to cops about, if you show up at 3 a.m. and there's a guy naked in the middle of the street talking to Jesus, he might be a little unhinged.
That's not the normal conversation to have at that time. Neither is the right clothing. Yeah, that's true.
Right. And so try to engage him in some conversation before you try to just go and grab him and take him down, So I think there's still, it talks about the work ahead, mm-hmm. and the work ahead is to look at a different methodology for taking these reports, which cops don't want to go anyway. We do cops a big disservice. So on the day that they graduate from the academy and everybody raises their hand and gets sworn in, we tell them, you are our most valuable employee. Mm-hmm. And then, oh, wow, that means I'm going to get to go work on career criminals. Well, no.
Yeah. No, that's not where you're going first. That is not where you're going first.
No, you're going to go hump these calls for the next couple of years.
Yeah.
And so our new officers are disconnected from the primary crime reduction mission of the agency. Mm-hmm. and you know, and I got horror stories. I got stories about cops who you know, they know who the career criminal unit is looking for, and so they see a guy who they know, you know, well, they're keeping tabs on him, and I see him out here at 2 a.m. So let me do a traffic stop and do an FI just to let them know that you know, he's out here. And the poor officer who thinks he's doing good gets cursed out by somebody in the career criminal unit who says, "Why are you treading on my turf?" So the other part of that is that we have probably over specialized, and that the work that gets done, you know, it's not that seasoned narcotic detective who's going to show up at your door at 3 a.m. You know, you're going to get a rookie cop and hopefully a supervisor. Right. And so again, and I'll jump all the way to the conclusion. So the conclusion is that instead of sworn police officers taking these reports, why don't we put the people who want to be cops and employ them to take those calls while they are getting a 4-year degree? And so the future of policing is probably going to look a lot like nursing. We don't wait for nursing candidates to graduate to see if they faint at the sight of blood. You know, we're going to find out somewhere in their sophomore or junior year if they can change bedpans, if they can give injections. And so, you know, it's one of the big mistakes we made in the industry. And just to kind of put a point on the edge, you know, I always hate to bring him up, but J. Edgar Hoover was right about one thing. Let's hire people at 25 with a college degree. And policing is now so complex that it requires a much, much different kind of not just training, which we provide, but education and training. And my Black academician friends, anytime we ever get into this discussion, they want to put all of the blame on current day American policing on slave patrols. Now, I clearly and readily admit that a big portion of the way in which Southern policing developed was, you know, after the Civil War was, yes, the patty rollers and the slave patrol people became the cops. And there's a nexus. But policing was screwed up already. And from the very, very beginning, you know, the low status of policing created this conundrum of having people who were in fact wholly unemployable in other avenues because they were big, brawny guys who would haul people down to the magistrate, or basically, you know, it's the guys who were the bouncers in the bars and the taverns who became the cops. And so we got off to a bad start. And, you know, I'm not necessarily a fan of national policing, but I do think that we would have been better off had all of us municipal police been state police. And that, you know, when you became a state police officer, you went to some place maybe not quite as rigid as West Point or Annapolis, but why is there not an ROTC like avenue to go through to become a police officer? And I think a 4-year liberal arts education provides some backdrop. You know, when we now talk to community groups who all say, you know, we want to be involved in your hiring, and that new officers should spend a week in a soup kitchen. And yes, they're absolutely right. They should do all these things, but they should do it before they become police officers. We need, you know, the way we hire now, we don't know, we really don't know whether you're going to be a good cop until 3 to 5 years into the job. 3 years, 2 years for people who really kind of get into it. And I always say, okay, at what point is somebody ready to be an FTO, a field training officer? And I get tossed out of a lot of rooms because I think that in your first 5 years that you ought to be able and capable of becoming an FTO, because once you're in 5 years, you ought to be able to be capable of training a rookie.
Yeah.
And so before you run off and be a detective, or run off in your case, get on a motorcycle.
Yeah, that's what I want to do. I definitely want to do that.
I looked it up in the book.
I definitely want to do that at TPD. You're right. I might even still be on it. I'll be tired by now.
Right. Yeah. So, but that during your first 5 years, you get this good grounding, and be qualified to be an FTO, and then the other is this whole notion of giving people jobs, and then you go stay in that job for the rest of your career, and it's, oh, thank God, I never want to go back to patrol. But if you come back to patrol, so I want to put corporal stripes on FTOs. And basically,
I can see that.
Absolutely, right.
Yeah, I can see that.
And clearly, if you look at video, you can tell we need more street supervision. Yeah. Sergeants now have been saddled with so many administrative duties that they're really not on the street. And when you have a place where all the rookies are on midnight and all the rookie sergeants are on midnight, who's going to show up at your house at 3 a.m. is probably the lowest ranking and newest officers and supervisors on the department. And that's not good for anybody.
But you're right, though. And it's realistic. And, I never thought about like the ROTC version of like law enforcement, or like how nurses have clinicals, like kind of seeing, like doing like an internship almost. Like if you're in a criminal justice program in college, like, all right, your junior year, you need to be with the Tallahassee Police Department. Your senior year, you need to be with the Jefferson County or the Leon County Sheriff's Office. Like you need to kind of get your feet into that water, because if you can't survive it, if you're not going to enjoy it now, then you're definitely not going to get into it once you're by yourself. So rather just take a chance and just take you from being I had somebody on, and that's why I could say it, going from a banker to now handling calls for service. Hey, let's walk you through some kind of steps, because you're right. In other industries, we do that. Like, I don't know. I know firefighters don't do it. I don't think EMTs do it, but nurses do. So does the military. A lot of military. Now, you can't go straight from being in high school to being like enlisted and stuff like that, but you can also be an ROTC through high school. And then in college, you have the ROTC program where you're getting your education, and then you're also doing military type activities while you're in the college. So by the time you come out of college, you're either going in as an officer, or you're going in with some type of experience. So that makes sense. I like that.
Yeah. And I think, we just can't get ourselves outside that box. And to kind of go back to, your original question about, which era, or, which 10 years do I, so I said, the 70s, but I want to also point this out, that we think that policing doesn't change. It's changing all the time. Mm-hmm. And we just don't address the change, or forecast and look ahead for the change that's on us. And I think that certain conditions that we deal with were predictable long before we got knee deep into it. We're in a continual drug explosion. Right. The homeless population. I tell people that that in my I guess during the time that I was in school, because I was a psych major in the late 60s, the idea was to have many more community-based drug treatment, mental health facilities, because we knew we were going to shut down the big mental institutions. So we shut down the mental institutions, never built the community-based and so now we have a homeless epidemic, and obviously, somewhere around 80% of homeless people all are in some kind of mental distress. And so we never prepared for that. In policing, we even though it's a service industry, our tool is always the law enforcement, and it's the ultimate decision that we make. It will be based on our ability to make arrest and use force. And so, that's why we have all of these mishaps where, we're dealing with people who are emotionally upset, even to the point of having people commit suicide by cop, which is, I think, when you look back in the 70s, that would be something that this will never happen. So how do you read the signs? And so, and I do believe that we do want to get an understanding that people are bringing good judgment and decision-making capabilities to this job. I think, good intentions is good, but, your ability to size up a situation and make good, sound, logical decisions. But, we can look at YouTube now and see a bunch of really, really bonehead kinds of things that
the
cops get themselves caught into, and even when they know they're wrong, the inability to back off and say, yeah, you're right, I have no justifiable reason for stopping you, I just need to let you go.
Right. Yeah. You got that one. Yeah. Just go. Go.
Just go. And so, I think, if you pay attention to it, you see where we could move to if we had a mind to.
Now, we talk about change. You talked about everything that's going on, and there's actually a sign that's behind your head that I feel like is fairly new. In your video is Bobcat Consulting. I looked up on LinkedIn, and that just came about in 2022. So is that a spinoff of something else, or did you create a whole nother side to what you're promoting in law enforcement right now with Bobcat Consulting?
No, what happened was that the original company was Bobcat Training and Consulting Incorporated. Yeah. Right. So I had everything under one umbrella, because most of the training was law enforcement oriented. We were doing, I do say this, that where I train now, I typically don't really do cops. I'm much better with supervisors and managers, and because and I recognize that my discussion is heavily management oriented. Yeah. And but I do always say this. So my audience is those people who know that one day they're going to sit in one of the big chairs. But I also say there are people in the room who currently don't envision sitting in one of the big chairs, but at some point when they have 8, 9, sometimes 10 years on a department, some supervisor is standing in front of them and they look at them real hard and say, I think I can do a better job than this joker.
I've heard that in the past before I got in leader. Yeah, I heard somebody tell me that before. There's like, you know what? I don't even want to be a supervisor, but since that person did it, I'm going to do it too.
Right.
Yeah, so, I have heard that. I've heard that several times. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's all real. Of a sudden, okay, now I've finally decided that I want to sit in one of the big chairs. And the question becomes, what have I been doing to prepare myself to sit in one of these big chairs?
Okay, I have one for you. And I just heard this question. I was on the phone earlier today with a potential client, and I was asking him, Like, what are some issues he sees in his leaders? And what he told me is that he has a lot of brand new leaders and a lot of seasoned leaders. Like, it's like 2 to 3 years and then 15 years and like nothing in between. What he asked me, or what he says he sees the issue being that he's having a hard time breaking through, is motivating them to be in their leadership roles. So if you were talking to that person that is a training sergeant, training director, and they were like, man, I'm trying to get my leaders to actually embrace their roles, but it's not just like a one era thing. It's like literally all over the place. Like, either one group wants to text and scroll through social media, or the other group just is like, you know what, I'm 5 years from retirement. How do you bring them all together in a room and start to elevate that mindset and that purpose?
So I don't do that.
I had an answer though. I knew what I would do, but I was like, you know what? Since you talk about supervisors and managers.
Yeah. And so I say Charlotte, North Carolina may do this better than most departments I know, where they do have a career development program for every employee. And
succession planning.
Yeah. And they're serious about it, you know, and so and it's just so unfortunate that, you know, succession planning is picking your friends in most places.
Yeah, it is.
You tutor your friends. Mm-hmm. You know, and I will say this now, the thing that I believe in is, you know, I look for people who are hungry for you know, upward mobility, and I'm willing to tutor and to at least have the conversation with those people who I believe would be good supervisors. But you're not gonna turn somebody into a supervisor and when they don't want to. And what they look at is, you know, and this is terrible because they see the job as babysitting. Yeah. And look, I got enough of my own problems. I don't need anybody else's.
Yeah, that's I know. I heard those terms too. Yeah.
Right. And so, you know, and it's not good because, you know, it doesn't seem that the corporate model works real well in policing in terms of really preparing people for upward mobility, preparing them for that end of the job. You know, how do you manage people? You know, and police performance evaluations are notoriously bad, and nobody ever wants to do it. And so, you know, we believe in central tendency. You know, we made it easy to have, you know, make everybody average. And it's sad because that goes back to the officers in the Pew Research report saying, you know, and where you see it is that when you look at disciplinary histories, you'll see that, you know, this officer, who obviously has been performing poorly because of their misconduct, has been getting average or above average performance evaluations for years.
Yeah, so it doesn't add up.
Yeah, so it's much easier because then you have to write if you're going to be above the line or below the line. But I can just check the boxes if I keep everybody, you know, in the middle. So you know, we don't take performance evaluation seriously. But what I say is, so we take, you know, so in early in my career, we called it the scandal sheet. So the scandal sheet was your weekly productivity report that you had to turn into a sergeant. Now, you know, it listed about 50 things, but you know, they're only looking at 10 of them. One is arrest, citations. You know, there were a bunch of other things. So you could list that you had taken 900 reports as long as these other blocks, you know, and so the scandal sheet was more important than performance evaluation, because you didn't want the sergeant, they used to do very draconian things to officers who weren't performing. So in DC, the worst of unions would never let you do this now, but they would give you what was called the short beat around the station. So for 8 hours, your beat was to walk around the police station. So it's basically, in sociology, a status degradation ceremony.
Yeah.
That's what that is.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, because you see him walking. Oh, he got duty. He got duty patrol, literally, or he got station patrol, literally. Literally, he has station patrol.
And all your friends ride by and taunt you all day long.
Oh, they're beeping the horn, they're hitting the sirens, they're sending messages.
Exactly.
Yeah,
you got it. Yeah, cops are terrible.
Yeah.
So my sense is, back to that whole issue is that we don't really prepare people for change, and there's an interesting dynamic, I think, because the primary aim in patrol is to get out of patrol.
Yeah.
Right. So when we do that, and the best way to get out of patrol and to get into an investigative slot, to get on a motor, go to traffic, go to intelligence, go to narcotics, is to be able to work with little or no supervision. Because if you need close supervision, you're going back to patrol.
Yeah.
But here's what we do. We also take our best supervisors out of patrol and we put them in charge of units of police officers who allegedly need little or no supervision.
Yeah.
And the way the dynamic is that, so a guy we take off the street, we put him in intelligence, and he eventually gets enough rank to be a district commander. So he comes back out of wherever it was that he was working and becomes a community-based district commander. He has no community ties.
Yeah.
And that's what we find in this engagement is you have to have a district commander who feels like he shares the same turf with the community stakeholders on that piece of ground. And it is one of my pet peeves here in Tallahassee, because the chief, when he took office, promised to create sectors or districts. And there's been a map here for years on what districts would look like, but we currently don't have enough staffing to employ the plan, largely because we've over specialized. So one of the other things that I think we're going to see in the future is some decentralization. Policing is all done at a neighborhood level.
Yeah.
And we need to commit more of our expert resources to the problems that exist much closer to the ground. And I think these are big trends that we just have to find the will to reverse ourselves. And what I say is that, if we're going to a decentralized model, then those district commanders are the best people we have. That's where we need that good leadership, insightful leadership, and understanding of the issues in any particular neighborhood. And that's not to say just communities of color, but I kind of say, it would take a special person. You're familiar with Tallahassee, so you're the district commander in Killearn. Well, that's a different kind of policing. It's a different kind of neighborhood, but I guarantee you, they have issues too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, how do you, and all of this is about being able to rub shoulders and see the people you serve as as contributors, and our methodology in neighborhood policing just can't be Well, we send everybody down here on fishing expeditions, and we just drag net and stop everybody until we come up with a gun or some dope, and do nothing but upset the people in that neighborhood by doing that kind of draconian policing.
Right. So no, and that makes sense. Yeah, and it's so many different ways you could take that. We're not going to tonight because it's getting later in the show. So we're not. I have so many angles I really want to take with that, but I'm like, you know what? If I start down this path, this is going to be like another hour and a half because it's so many different dynamics we can always take with leadership and how to move forward. And I know, given your 54 years of experience, like you've seen a lot of things that work, don't work, and obviously it's always about progression and how to move forward. So I'm going to leave it at that because there's always move. But I think you said it multiple times. Change happens all the time, and we have to be able to adapt, and we should be looking for the future. So as we think about that, and my viewers kind of ponder, and they're wondering how they're going to pivot and they're going to change to adjust to their current roles in law enforcement, or if I have a future law enforcement officer listening, like what are they thinking about as they enter the role? If they were looking to reach out to you even more, they're like, you know what? We like Bob. We want to get in Bobcat Consulting. Although he's kind of venturing out to private, obviously he's not completely gone. How would they find you?
Yeah, you can go to Bobcat Consulting.org.
Okay.
And I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there. You can find me on Facebook. And we are currently revamping our Policing with Our Community site, but it will be back up, shortly here. Probably within the month. We had to find ourselves. We had to find the niche that we wanted to be in the space that we wanted to be in, and community. While we are really looking for community engagement, that takes very willing partners on both sides to make that happen. Police department has to want to do it. Community has to want to do it. We can't force it on people. So in the meantime, we do that, and we've done that. We've done that in a number of places, but we specifically want to target community groups specifically. We can do some police training too, but we needed to refocus. But Bobcat Consulting, LLC, you can find me there. Like I said, on most people find me on LinkedIn. I think more than anything else. And I seem to know a lot of people, and usually, and I'm spending a lot of time really kind of getting into the criminal justice programs at HBCUs. I'll point this out. Dr. Kadesti Youssef, who's at Bethune-Cookman, did some work last year in a study called "I Fear for My Life," and she interviewed a lot of Black collegians. And despite the fact that most of them had unpleasant encounters with police officers, 43% of them said that they would consider a job in policing. And which is right, exactly. We were all kind of what?
Hey, that is, I mean, but that's what the number. I tell people, hey, if you want to learn something, do a study. I mean, don't guess or assume, because allow people to actually tell their own opinion. Don't give it to them.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So and based on that, we're looking for funders to because the question that I get all the time is, does Noble or any other organization have internships? So we're looking for people to fund internships, so that if people are at least interested in law enforcement careers, we can give them the opportunity to take a much closer look, and also give them some help in sorting out law enforcement jobs. I think despite the fact that most graduates are thinking about federal law enforcement, but local law enforcement, I tell everybody, it's been very good to me. My wife is a retired deputy chief. And I do tell people this, that, among my peers, when I look around, all of us who still have our health are living larger than we ever thought we would. And, great pensions.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, I usually tell people about the trajectory, and I don't want to go down too far this because this would be a whole nother part. But I do say people should start off in the county jail or in corrections to kind of learn how to talk to people without a weapon. Then you go police officer, deputy. And then if your palate is still wet and desires more, then you go into the federal. Because by the time you get to federal, especially like in an FBI, DEA, ATF, you're not on the streets. You're only dealing with people through investigative processes. And a lot of times you're not seeing them in their natural form versus being in corrections or being on the streets. You're going to meet people at their destination with no information. So you got to kind of build that rapport. You got to learn how people are living every day. So I'm with you. Like usually the federal side, like, I mean, it ain't going to change it, but people are still coming out with the goals to get a federal job. But I do definitely support people starting on the streets somewhere, have their feet on the ground to start that process.
Not only that, but in most of the federal services, you're guaranteed that they're going to move you.
Yeah, for sure.
If you're tied to a specific community, or there's a locale where you want to work, and that's the other part, is that as a college graduate, and especially if you speak multiple languages, you can go where you want to go. They're going to give you a bonus. Somebody's going to give you a bonus.
That is true.
Right. So that becomes the other part is, think about your lifestyle and where it is that you want to live, and look for jobs in the locale where you'd like to live. And so, if Southern California is your thing,
get a local job. So
exactly.
But on that note, so what final words do you have for the audience?
Mostly that the underbelly of policing and the history of policing is fascinating. And I think, as people who are lifelong learners, that it's an interesting field to look at and to understand. And I think, I believe this. One of the things that I kind of tout on this relationship is that the more you know about the police, the better served you are when you need them. And if you want good service, it's a two-way street. And I think that what we find is that the better off you're prepared for things in your life, and it's partly our job to help you in our crime mitigation, crime prevention, to give you the best opportunity to survive the things that befall us in our day-to-day travels. Some of that is very, very simple. So it's down to, when you get in the car, buckle your seatbelt.
Get ready. Yeah, but no, you're right though. I mean, sometimes just simply, and I love that lifelong learning. And I definitely know you fulfill that role, because once again, 5 decades, you didn't give up on the learning side, and just the things that you quote. I mean, you're talking about surveys from 2017, things that happened in the Washington Post in the 70s. So obviously you appreciate the information you read, the information you learn, because it's important to know. And anybody that wants to be a part of any industry, I think that's what it's about. You can't be a part of every industry. You got to pick one usually, because whatever one you pick, there's a lot of information on. So if you are in law enforcement, or you desire to be in law enforcement, or you're a citizen listening to this and you're like, you know what, I want to learn more about it, go study. There's research out there. There's data. There's Bobcat Consulting. There's other training programs like that will allow you to learn. So you're not just guessing or assuming that only 5% of people that's had a negative encounter in law enforcement that are Black don't want to be. Well, no, the studies say something different. Go learn. Don't make your own assumptions, because while I do believe there's still not enough studies in law enforcement related to like things like emotional intelligence or like things like that. Like I still believe there's not enough, but there are some. So it's not like it's completely obsolete, but in other industries, they're doing a lot better, but it's just part of the business. However, the whole point is, if you want to know, go learn about it. So, Bob, you said it great, and I can tell you the viewers that are going to listen and hear it, I'm sure they're going to be reaching out to you or really taking home, because there's not many people that can come on a show and positively, with the amount of energy you have, talk about this industry and continue to move on. Because like I said, I don't even think you want to stop. Like, I don't think you want to stop anytime soon. Like, you want to keep going because you enjoy what you do. And I think when you have that level of passion, that's what allows you to succeed.
Well, but I do realize that in this place in time, my time to get better golf scores is running out.
Oh,
and I need to be able to beat my wife before I go.
That's fair. Hey, you gotta have that balance. But like, Bob, you know what? I appreciate you coming on here tonight, because I know you are busy, man. You have a lot of stuff going on, and the viewers, I know they're gonna appreciate it, because it's, like I said, it's hard to get a wealth of knowledge that people actually know. I mean, the one of the things I love about this show is that I have a wide range of people. 54 years. I had someone in here that only had 2 years on my show a couple of weeks ago. And everybody has their different views, rightfully so, but everybody brings a different perspective. And I think that's where it counts, because in law enforcement, when we deal with people, we deal with the spectrum. Like, there's not like, oh, we're only going to deal with people in the Killarn area that are well off and in their middle age, all that. No, you might be working down on the south side on Gain Street in Lake Bradford, and you're gonna deal with a whole different group of people. Or you might be working by the college at FSU and dealing with that group. You don't know. But just like how it is for us, we got to make sure we have that open mindset to realize that there's always more to learn.
Thank you for having me. Invite me back sometime.
Oh, I will. I always tell people as I'm talking, I'm thinking about other guests that I can pair. And you know who I'm probably gonna try to pair you with. Like, so I'm gonna call Mike. I'm like, hey, Mike, just tell your wife you ain't coming. You ain't gonna see you for 3 hours, because I'm gonna put you on with Bob, and it's going downhill quickly. We're gonna have to cut this for 3 different episodes. But hey, just be ready. So, but no, Bob. Once again, I truly appreciate your time, and I know this is gonna be a great show once I edit it. And this is definitely something that I'm very happy that Mike personally was able to push me towards, because you've been an amazing guest.
Cool. Thanks so much, Mike.
All right. Thank you. And guys, thank you. Y'all be safe. Y'all need anything, let us know.
You've been listening to the LEO First Podcast. Michael has been in law enforcement since 2005. He's worked for 3 law enforcement agencies in 3 different states. He's a professional speaker who travels the country teaching about leadership development and self-awareness. And he's the author of a book called Greatness Beyond the Badge: The 3 Key Principles for Self-Awareness. It's Michael's passion to bring law enforcement members' stories to the front, so you get the real and raw take. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with Michael on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Michael Laidler, on Twitter at Michael A. Laidler, on Facebook at Michael Laidler Leadership. Send an email to michael@michaelalaidler.com and hit the website at michaelalaidler.com. See you next time on the LEO First Podcast.
Like that, I'm going to be leaving a note on a vehicle advising him to remove it.